Welcome back to season 14 of the Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning podcast, where we connect the science-based evidence behind social and emotional learning and emotional intelligence training for improved well-being, achievement, productivity, and results, using what I saw as the missing link. Since we weren't taught this when we were growing up in school, the application of practical neuroscience. I'm Andrea Samadi, an author and an educator with a passion for learning, and launched this podcast 7 years ago now with the goal of bringing all the leading experts together in one place to help us to apply this research in our daily lives. Welcome back. It's always good to take some time away for travel and family time, and it feels incredible to get back into routine and recording. So thank you for tuning back in after our summer break, where I hope you've taken some time off to refresh before diving back into the second half of 2025. For today's episode number 365, we meet with someone I first heard about in our very first interview, episode 3, with educator Ron Hall from Valley Day School, Pennsylvania, on launching your neuroeducational program. Ron Hall mentioned it was today's guest who opened his mind to connecting the brain to his classrooms many years ago, and he's never looked back. Today, we welcome back resiliency expert, author Horacio Sanchez to the podcast for the fourth time. We first met him on episode 74 on how to improve brain science to improve school climate, episode 111 next on finding solutions to the poverty problem, and again on episode 177 where we gathered a team of experts to dive into the most significant insights that they've noticed over the years in neuroscience. When we first met Horacio, we focused on his book, The Education Revolution, that was published by Corwin Press, that addresses the decline in empathy, increase in obesity, and the impact on implicit bias on minority students. Our conversation turned to focus on the problems we were seeing in the world at that moment, and that was July of 2020, highlighting the need for racial change through an understanding of race and culture. And I knew that Horacio was deep into his next book, The Poverty Problem, How Education Can Promote Resilience and Counter Poverty's Impact on Brain Development, that we went deep into on episode 74. Today, we meet with Horacio Sanchez to review his latest book, Unlocking School Bias, Using Neuroscience to Improve Student Outcomes, that was released in February of this year through Corwin Press. His most recent book, Unlocking School Bias, ends the confusion around bias and provides educators with research and strategies that enable them to effectively address bias in the classroom and school in appropriate and productive ways. In this book, you'll learn to explore your own and your students' biases, and you'll discover the latest research from psychology, education, and neuroscience. You'll uncover different types of biases, including confirmation bias and impact bias, and how they manifest themselves in everyday life, with practical strategies for educators who are ready to change their and their students' actions. You'll learn about patterns in one's environment and how they create biases and affect the brain's development. Let's now meet Horacio Sanchez for the fourth time to the podcast and explore our own biases first, and then see how this understanding can help us with our students in the classroom, or with athletes we coach, or in our workplaces. Welcome back to the podcast for the fourth time, Horacio. It's incredible to see you again. What have you been up to since I've spoken to you last?
Well, let me see. Done a lot of traveling, a lot of presentations, and I snuck a book in there.
Awesome. So I've been following. I love following you on Instagram. I get to see the plane taking off. It's almost like there's an episode of like CSI Miami or something where they go wheels up. and they go to their next thing. I'm like, Horacio's wheels up, he's off. It's exciting to watch you. So Horacio, I know that your next book is on biases in the schools, and I know that implicit bias came up in our very first interview, and I've had other guests talk about this topic, and I wonder what made you now write a book about unlocking school bias.
um, because of the confusion. I, I think schools have spent an enormous amount of resources on this topic, and it actually has not been very fruitful. There's been a lot of research that shows that after the training, things are worse than when they were before the training. And then some research we came out recently that showed that the only places that they've found that work on bias has been productive is when it focused on how the brain produces bias. And that's logical because if I understand how the brain does it and then I accept what the data, then I'm willing to say, okay, that seems logical to me. And I'm willing to do A, B, and C. While all the other approaches tend to say, this is what's going on and you don't know it, but it is true. So let's do it. And so it's just hard to accept. And so there's so many misconceptions about bias. And I also think a lot of the topic has been diluted into some very simplistic one facet of bias. And bias works as a very complex whole in the brain. And unless you understand it in its totality, you tend to make a lot of errors.
Exactly. And I feel like that's where I was when I first learned about it and started to look at it. Was very shocked, of the biases that I had that I didn't know I had. And even, after reading the foreword by David Fink in your book, he mentions that he lived in a world where everyone around him constantly made assumptions about how people with dyslexia and ADHD thought, felt, and performed in school. So coming from the classroom, just how students are feeling in the classroom. And he said, you can't dodge these assumptions that we know are biases. And he started to see things differently, and that's why he realized that he wanted to go into the work that he did, which was very powerful to open up your book like that. So, what can we do to check ourselves every day to stop our subconscious mind from determining our thoughts and our behaviors around others?
Well, I think, and this is where it gets so complicated. You can't go through a day without some facet of bias influencing you. However, bias occurs pretty much subconsciously. So it occurs at 200 milliseconds or less. That means whatever biases you have, you're not aware of. You may be able to analyze backwards, or you may be able to guess or make assumptions, but you're not aware.
Mm.
So you're asking someone to work on things that they don't know are true unless they believe they're true. And if you think about the range of bias, you can be biased by how hard your chair is that you're sitting in, influencing how you will think at that moment. You can be biased by simple patterns in your environment that have been there for just a little while or a long period of time, and they just seep in, and all your brain is doing is saying, okay, these two things are constantly together, so let's make it easy. You think of one, you'll think of the other, but you don't have to even worry about it. We'll have it happen subconsciously. So your day is filled with a lot of decisions that are influenced by your subconscious brain. And so the only solution we know of is that if you can at least learn how the brain truly produces it and the full scope of bias, then you may have a way of saying, okay, then these things are logical and maybe I should do something about them.
Okay. And so where do we even start? Like, let's think about how biases are impacting student well-being and achievement. Where would we start with, let's say, a teacher in the classroom, or you're a coach with your team, or even,
Okay.
a manager in an office with a whole team of people. Like, how do we even begin in, applying it to all realms, right?
Okay, let's think about, okay, what are we talking about? Let's take a student. Let's take a student like David. Let's say someone has dyslexia.
Yep.
A kid comes into elementary school. He's not diagnosed usually. He's just struggling.
Yep.
And what teachers are faced with every day is norming behaviors and academic performance. And the norming comes from the other kids. I got 30 kids. I started teaching. 20 of it got it by this point. Another 7 was really took a little longer. 2 were really struggling. And there's this one outlier that no matter what I'm doing isn't moving at all.
Right.
So now he's very different. I'm trying, and nothing I'm doing is working. So every time I work with the student, there is an association of this student failure, this student failure, this student failure. After a while, your brain is going to go, I look at David or I look at this student, and my brain is automatically going to say failure. When we have these biases, one of the places that comes out is in our emotional cueing. So it is likely to be conveyed very subtly through face, hands, posture, gestures, or tone of voice, or all of the above, or some of the above. So let's say now David is designed now to have an eye system that's supposed to pick up these little cueings, even if he doesn't know it. So he probably doesn't know it, but he's going to have a gut reaction, and his gut reaction is going to say, this teacher doesn't think I can do this. Yep. Now, meanwhile, the teacher has said nothing. The teacher has been encouraging. The teacher is trying. Now, if you think about that, the minute he starts to have a negative outcome, our brain will weigh the negative outcome so much like it's going to be, oh my God. And now the teacher starts to eventually believe he can't, not consciously, but subconsciously, because we have a thing called confirmation bias. Once we start seeing him fail repeatedly, our brain goes, well, he can't. And once you start believing he can't, your eye systems will only pick up failures and kind of miss little successes. And then your brain will go to what? Impact bias. You start to go, oh my God, if he doesn't make progress, I don't have the time. Oh my God, I have 30 other kids. If I give him what he needs, I won't be able to teach the other kids. And all of this starts to really weigh. And by the time you know, every time she looks at him, the student feels this, and it has a real impact. So if you think about David's story, isn't that unique? And I've heard him talk about it several times. And one of the things he mentioned was, guess what? When he was in elementary school, how the teachers treated him made him feel stupid. Now, understand, do you think any teacher sat down and said to him, David, you're not that bright? No, he picked up on that. And because of that, it impacted his behavior and his performance. So this is how bias works. And one of the only ways that we can do it then is, if I know that, then I understand that, okay, in certain situations, I have to be conscious and very intentional on controlling face, hands, posture, gestures, and tone of voice to make sure I don't convey an unintentional message. And that takes work.
Yeah. Wow, this is good. This is really, really good. So same scenario. You're a coach and you've got a player that, same thing, they're not getting a skill. Same idea, or, somebody in the workplace. They're not getting something, or, they're being coached in some way. It's the same idea, right? It's how we talk to whoever we're working with.
What they believe, and oftentimes it has very little to do with your words. It has far more to do with how our brains pick up meaning. Our brain picks up meaning not from words, and people don't understand that. I am designed to get the intention of your language through nonverbal cueing. So me and you can know right now, I'm sitting down talking to you, And if you were to change your facial expression and say the same line three different ways, I would have three different interpretations of the same line. So
Yeah.
how we interpret language often has to do with your tonality, your facial expression, your gesture systems. And that is the first place that our brains allow the emotional brain to take over those parts of the body when we have any kind of subtle kinds of impressions of other people. And that's hard for us to believe because we think we're in control.
Right. Well, how would we know if we are talking to a student or someone else and they're picking up on our subconscious bias? How would we
We
know?
don't. And that's why you have to say, okay, here are the places that I need to be certain that I am not. Because if it is subconscious, we're going to waste time trying to prove that we should know. But we can assume. One of the things that people don't know is bias lives in discomfort. So where you are discomfort, you have a level of discomfort, there's a high probability you'll develop a bias. Let's say I'm uncomfortable going to this location. There's a high probability that I'm going to have a bias every time I go to that location. I'm uncomfortable when I'm in this room. I'm uncomfortable when I'm with this person. And discomfort for different people can be very different. For example, there are some people who are uncomfortable with people who are skinny. There are people who are uncomfortable with people who are overweight. There are people who are uncomfortable with people who are really smart. There are people who are uncomfortable with women. There are people who are uncomfortable with men. There are people who are uncomfortable with children. Wherever you have a level of discomfort, there's a high probability your brain will say there is bad things about this, that every time you're there, your brain will put it together. And so where you have a level of discomfort, you should assume that your face, hands, body, gestures, your tone of your voice, everything will convey your level of discomfort, and others will pick it up, and your level of discomfort will be validated more likely because of your attitude. So, what happens if you were able to change that? Now, let's say now I assume I have a level of discomfort. If I would assume that, I would change my face, hands, posture, gestures, and tone of voice. There's a high probability I would get a better feedback. And the better feedback will help me overcome my level of discomfort. So that's what makes bias an interesting formula that we need to consider, because oftentimes when we have bias, the biases end up being confirmed because we send out such bad signals and we get confirmation back. And then it goes from a bias to a reality that we actually had a very strong role in the outcome.
Oh, there's so much in that that I was thinking, especially with schools, of where you feel comfortable versus where you don't. And in my line of work, I get to visit schools. And some schools on the outside look like not as nice as some of the other schools. And I could decide, oh, I'm not going to go into that school because of how it looks on the outside. But when you go on the inside, you see the people that are in the schools, the students learning, and you get a completely different picture of the school. So in if we were to analyze this, my bias would be from the outside of the school looking in of what the
Right.
school is performing like on the outside. And so people that don't go into the schools, I often hear the question, how are you handling these very difficult times, what with schools? And I actually see it differently, because when you go inside the school, it's not always difficult. There's amazing things happening like you see when you go into a school. They're not all difficult times here. A lot of schools are thriving and lots of amazing things are happening. But from the outside, you can't tell, right? Like,
Think about it. You like a lot of sports and you do a lot of studying on sports. Now, and you also do a lot of work with corporations. So let's look at it this way. Okay. We know certain things about the most successful corporations in the world. They tend to have certain things in common. One of the things they tend to have in common is that they create a team atmosphere where everybody thinks they're part of the team. And the second thing they seem to do is they seem to have goals that everybody's bought into. So everyone thinks they're going in the same direction. So if you go to those corporations, one of the things you find is there seems to be a thing called suspended bias in those corporations. Although the people on the team are different than each other, right now, when you get into that environment,
Wow.
we're all on the same team. They're
Wow.
locking arms
Yeah.
and we're all going in the same direction. So what is a school that does this? Schools that create environments or climates where kids feel that I'm a part of the team, where the teachers think I'm a part of the team. And when they have unified goals, we're going in this direction. You walk into any school, regardless of what it looks like, if they have those elements, the school feels fine.
Right.
But also understand some of the things that end up happening when you're in a climate like that. Um, you walk in and you're going to see a lot more people happy. Well, guess what? If your brain looks at someone who's happy, your mirror neurons mirror it, your motor neurons actually activate to mirror the emotions they're expressing. The happy emotions they're expressing, either their face, their posture, their gesture systems, their voice tone. Once that happens, there's chemicals assigned to that expressions, and it makes you feel better. So you can go to school, and how happy are the people in the school will predict to you how good the school is. Now, the fact that you had a bias of how the school looked and predicting what will happen inside is not unusual, because your environment does bias you. And so that school that did a good job with a bad environment is overcoming things. But it does have something to overcome, because if if I am sitting in a place that tends to be not as clean, not as warm, not as many resources, that does bias the brain towards more negative thinking. While beautiful places, clean places, places with resources, biases the brain to more positive thinking.
Wow.
So those schools are doing a lot of amazing things to overcome their deficits, and we commend them, but they're overcoming something to get there. It's easier to achieve that in a place that's beautiful, you know.
Yeah. Oh, this is good. This is really good to think about all these different situations, especially applying it outside of schools. What are some common misconceptions about biases that are harmful that you see?
Wow. Well, what happened with bias? It got so connected. It got co-opted into the issues of racism and bias and equity, that people use the terms interchanged. And it started being a thing where bias and racism started to be an interchangeable type of word, which is not logical. Okay. Bias is bias is a range of things, not only dealing with race, that has to do with how your brain had a subconscious reaction. You can have a bias that's actually against your values and your beliefs. It's just subconscious because of the patterns that are in your environment. Now, when people started equating bias to racism, it made it one step away from people being accusatory, saying, if you have a bias, then you're a racist. And now you have a person who's not aware they have a bias because it's subconscious, and has a value system that's against that. If you label them with the term of racism, you can't even have a conversation, because you started the whole conversation of bias at the level of contention. And you're wrong, because bias and racism are not the same thing. So there's one misconception that constantly exists. Another one is people actually do believe that if I have strong values and beliefs, I will never have a bias that contradicts my strong values and beliefs. Well, your values and beliefs are cognitive. That's 600 milliseconds into the conversation. Your biases are 200 milliseconds. You cannot have your beliefs and values co-opt your biases. It works the other way around. Your biases occur first, so it influences your beliefs and values.
Oh, wow.
And so your beliefs and values are not a safeguard for not having a bias. And one of the other things that we wanted people to go, and we mentioned this a little earlier, is that if you just start to think of your levels of discomfort, that's one of the easiest ways to start to understand how bias works. Where are you uncomfortable? What causes you discomfort? Think of a germaphobe. A germaphobe is uncomfortable with anyone who's sick. After a while, they start, what place will a germaphobe be uncomfortable with? Oh my God, let's see. Hospitals. Oh, airplanes. And so, believe me, when you talk to the germaphobe, they're going to show strong biases against places like what? Being on a plane, going to a hospital. That's how bias works. So I think you have at least some strategies to think about, okay, there is a high probability I develop biases in the places of discomfort. So if I understood how my brain produced it and I'm able to agree with that, then I'm able to move forward and say, okay, I might need to do certain things in the areas that I have a level of discomfort, not wait, but preventative things so I can reduce the outcomes of my bias, because my biases are probably intensifying my fears.
So can we look at our brain now? So, you've covered a lot of how we can recognize that we all have biases. How can we now use neuroscience to understand how they're produced, when it's probable, and I understand now the uncomfortable part. That makes so much sense. I'm gonna like probably write down all the times and places I'm uncomfortable to really dig in, because that
Mhm.
ties into a lot, making connections here. But then, once we understand this, how can we now prepare ourselves to have an appropriate response?
Okay. So let's think about one of the most pervasive biases, because it's so common. The most pervasive bias that we know, other than, okay, you're born with three biases automatically: negative bias, confirmation bias, impact bias. You're born with those. The most pervasive bias that is cultivated is in-group preference. So the moment you became attached to mom and dad, you developed a thing called in-group preference. All that means is your brain got comfort from being with people who look like mom and dad, and then extended to family. So for the rest of, and this happens around 6 months of life. Usually by 9 months, most kids have what is called an in-group preference. Now, think logically forward. The first thing you need to think about that is this: your in-group preference was developed before you develop long-term memory. Long-term memory happens around age 3. You developed the in-group preference around 6 months of life. That's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Then you have, what are the ramifications of that? Well, one of the ramifications of that is when we bring people in, regardless of their ages, usually if we show them faces, they react very differently to faces that look like theirs, very calm, and have an emotional negative reaction to faces that look different. And that all came out of the in-group. None of this is conscious. No, they're not aware of this. They think it's fine. Okay, so what are the other ramifications? In real world life, one of the ramifications is who you're attracted to. So they did some studies on what makes up your inner close social network. And they found out across the world, most people's inner close social network looks pretty much like them. But understand why that is logical. You had an in-group bias as a child. You were drawn to people who looked like you. You have a higher level of comfort. That higher level of comfort makes that interaction more positive. a lower level of comfort with other people that don't look like you that makes those interactions not as pleasant. So it's natural then to cultivate the ones that you feel more comfortable with.
Mhm.
So now you carry that out. And one of the things we now know is then if I have a lower level of comfort with someone, I tend to portray it subconsciously through my face, hands, posture, gestures, and tone of voice. So now I'm at a decision. If the science shows all of this evidence that I am likely to portray negative cueing to people who don't look like me, then if I buy the science, I can say, okay, I don't have a conscious desire not to be liked by people who don't look like me. I've always thought I was doing a good job, but maybe I wasn't. So now I'm accepting that. So now I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to be more intentional with people who don't look like me, intentionally controlling my face, hands, posture, gestures, tone of voice. And some people say, well, that's phony. It's not going to work. It actually isn't, because all the research shows if I am very intentional with out-group people portraying positive cueing, what will eventually happen is my brain will start to actually wire that that's what I show. The minute that happens, guess what happens? My interactions with out-group members gets better, and their response to me gets better, and my response to them will, and then my level of comfort keeps on going up because of confidence. And suddenly I followed a science about something I was not aware of that I then validated through my behaviors. That's very different than me saying this other stuff. And so that is on an interpersonal level, that is what I can start to think about. But once again, don't forget all the other aspects of a bias that occurred. Okay. If I had, if I don't understand the science and I have these subtle negative cues with other people and they respond to me more negative, their response to me is going to be compounded. When we hook people under fMRI and we looked at what is a positive experience in their brain and what's a negative experience, the positive really does a surge in your brain that's actually very good. The negative in ratio of activity is 5 times higher. So a negative is more compounded to our brain. So now think about a person who doesn't do this. And when they do get negative response back in their gut, it's going to be compounded. And if they continue to do this and it happens time after time after time again, without them ever thinking they did anything wrong, what are they going to start having? They're going to start having a belief that this is different. And these people are kind of different. And once that belief happens, their eye system, confirmation bias, connects to the largest feature of our eyes, scanning feature, microsarcades, and it scans the environment to confirm our beliefs. So I will actually spot things that will make my beliefs stronger and miss contradictions. So there once again, it's going to get worse. And then my impact bias will roll in, and I'm going to start to then predict bad things. And the minute your brain predicts bad things, you subconsciously contribute to the prediction without even trying. So we now have a very simple thing. We started out with an in-group preference that came out of love for mom and dad, start to compound a comfort level for some, a lower comfort level for others, and then it's compounded by all the other things our brain does. And it becomes a reality that we just then will change we'll start to modify our behavior to go, I'll interact here with great comfort, and over here will not be as comfortable. Everybody goes to the area of comfort because the human brain really does like comfort, you know.
Yep. Yep. So that was chapter one of your book, The Birth of Bias. And, it helped me to understand like the fear of strangers that occurs early in life. And you did tie it to the classrooms. And I was thinking of like all the different times that I've been speaking to a group, whether it's been a presentation, who am I speaking to? Who am I locking eyes with in the room? Or smaller groups, when you have maybe 5 or 6 people in the room, am I focused on the leader or somebody I'm comfortable with more than I am the others. So just thinking about all different scenarios of how I might be, how I could improve this in-group bias in speaking to groups or teaching in classrooms.
It is so complicated because it is so subtle.
Mm,
You don't know, okay, your car isn't working right, but you're unaware of it. Do you fix it before you're unaware? It's irrational.
right.
So if bias is subconscious, who's addressing it? Nobody. And when we ran out with this flag that said bias, we're making bias more intentional in nature, we actually killed the entire science because we caused it to be a hammer rather than an explanation. And the explanation of bias and all the range of things that it is um, will help us be better. And I think that's something that we need to consider.
Got it. So just me being aware of connecting more with people who are not in my in group would be enough.
Would be a huge step. It will change the quality of your life. But if you also, but you know, I mean, you read the book, and I spent an entire chapter on things like negative bias because negative bias can be overwhelming, and it has nothing to do with just people. Negative bias has to do with everything, attitudes, beliefs, and to the point where negative bias is here because it's supposed to help us stay alive. It's supposed to make us better survivors. But if you start to think about quality of life, there is a level of negative bias that's healthy, but there's also that level of negative bias that isn't. Some people get so overwhelmed by their negative bias that they stop looking at the positive. And as a result, their negativity gets more compounded. If you look at that, quality of life also is impacted. Um, all the research says contentment has more to do with your internal condition than external factors. So if my internal condition is continually focused on the negative, am I a content person? There's a good probability not only are you not a content person, you're a miserable person. And a miserable person is going to give out miserable signals. And guess what they're going to get back? A miserable world. And they're going to get full evidence that the world is lousy because they're doing so many things that cause a lousy world. And that's just negative bias. Now you put negative bias with other things like change. Change is hard for the brain, or a group of people that you're not comfortable with, or a location that you don't want to, or a change in your skin, anything that causes that discomfort, negative bias just booms. And it's the people who understand this that can go, well, I need then to be more conscious of being more positive. And I think if we start to understand things in those ways, then we can have a yin and a yang to this and have some balance. Let me give you a really concrete example in the classroom. A student acts out. The moment the student acts out, if it caused me to be, oh my God, and I got a level of anxiety in the situation, my microsarcades, my eye systems will start to scan that student like 28% more than other students. That means I'll catch that student more. That means every time he does something, I'm catching him more than the other student. The student's going to think I'm picking on him, and the student's going to act out more. If I know this and I understand how bias works, the minute that student showed out as a disciplinary problem, me as a teacher now says one of my strategies to help the student is to be intentional in reinforcing when that student is on task, because I'm already automatically going to catch his bad stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss his good stuff. So I now have to have a strategy that says he acted out. I need to be intentional in saying, oh, thanks for being on task today. Thanks for doing the work well. You're doing really well today. Those things will help us because it balances the scales that we didn't even know are imbalanced, because this is all happening subconsciously. That teacher doesn't know that she's actually monitoring that kid more. It's completely subconscious. But if I know the science, I go, kids acting out, I'm going to monitor him more. Let me be intentional in balancing the scales.
And that was chapter 2, the glass is half empty, on the negativity bias of your book here. And I thought it was pretty interesting because I always try and err, like we talked in the beginning, on the positive side of things. And it's really interesting when it's just life. You get a piece of feedback. You did this great, this great. You could improve on that. I'm like, wait, what? What do you mean? I didn't even hear the rest of it. It's just
No.
so interesting how it's like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Let's go back to that. And trying to get them to change their mind that they didn't really see that. Why is it like that? We,
And to show you so bad, people who are chemically imbalanced tend to hear things and react to things that didn't even occur. So when I train, if there's 2,000 people out there, there's the chance that you're going to have one or two people who are chemically imbalanced, and they will react to things that were not even said. So,
yeah, yeah. Okay, good.
and I understand that because I know their condition, but it really tells us that we as a culture, we as a world need to understand that we have to be intentional in looking at things. But let's understand this. This is not positivity. This is saying it will change your brain chemistry, it will change your life. One of the best lessons we can give students is, if you can change your perceptions of things to be more positive, the world changes. And that's not just, oh, you're being positive, the world changes. So the first thing we know in the brain is, if I look at things more positively, my brain secretes better chemicals to help me maintain better balance. Well, let's go in outcomes. Let's look at Archer's work. Archer's looked at companies and found out, if I can make people more positive about what they're doing and look at their task more positively, they will be what? More productive. and he increased company productivity by just changing how people looked at their task, by being more positive at outlook of what they were doing. And it didn't matter what they were doing, because they could be cleaning hotels. If they could change the framework and had them feel more positive about what they were doing, the outcome changed. But also, not only the outcome changed, the productivity changed, the income levels of the hotel industry changed, that they did it. Everything changed in relation to that. And so there is more evidence than we'll ever want to know on the fact that there's a level of positivity that's healthy for us, but also is required for us to be really productive creatures.
Absolutely. And so the second part of chapter 2, the glass is half empty, I wondered, because I came across an example from the book on change in my day-to-day experience. So what can we do to help us through change, knowing that it's hard for the human brain, as there's so much change, like in education right now, in the world?
Um, I think the first thing people have to understand is, what is change? Change usually is stopping something and doing something new. So let's say you're stopping something that you've been doing for a while. Whatever you're doing for a while is a habit. That means every time I do it, my brain produces dopamine, which actually increases my homeostasis and is a productive hormone that is secreted when it's secreted in the nucleus accumbens. So dopamine there is wonderful. Okay. So let's say I stopped doing that, and I was doing this habit 3 times a day in the classroom. Every time I did it, I got dopamine. Now you're stopping me from doing that, and you want me to do something new. The moment you stop me, you have changed my brain chemistry, because I'm conditioned to receiving those doses of dopamine. Now the new thing, all new things require a greater level of focus and energy because it's new. That means it's going to be more taxing on my brain. So now I'm doing this new, more taxing thing, and I don't feel as great because I lost my dopamine. Now, let's say things start to get stressful in my school environment. My natural inclination would be to retreat to the old thing, and it'll go make me feel better. And then I'm going to think the new thing was terrible. Now, let's go to Microsoft. Microsoft makes major changes and never puts out any kind of stuff that says, hey, we're going to make a major change. Don't get mad. Microsoft just does it and doesn't care. You know why? Because the minute they put out a change, there are forums all over the country to come out, worst change in the world. Don't take the, it's terrible. And Microsoft just ignores them because they know one thing about technology today. Whether you like the change, you don't, you interact so much with your computer that in a matter of 2 weeks, the new thing will become habit.
Right, right.
So here's what I know. I know that that old habit you lost at one time was new, right?
Mm.
It didn't give you dopamine. It gave you dopamine eventually when you did it enough. So here is what I know as a person who knows the science. You give me a change. If I engage in the change long enough, it will actually be okay with me and it'll be fine. Is the change good? I don't know. Is the change bad? I don't know. But one of the things that I do know is resilient people adapt quickly. And you know why resilient people adapt quickly? Because they're able to engage in new things and get dopamine faster. So instead of avoidance, dive. I mean, the best outcomes in schools are when people are all going in the same direction. So we're not going to agree always on what that direction is. We're not going to agree in the methodology. But if we all just understand that the schools that actually have everyone engaging, and if you engage in it consistently, it becomes easy. The schools that do that have great outcomes, but people are constantly battling on the level of it's so new and it doesn't feel right. It's always going to not feel right. But what makes change hard is that our body, our whole homeostasis system is designed to maintain balance. And one of the elements that maintains balance is familiarity, the things I've always done. And the minute you change that, it is how quickly I can regain balance. So for me, avoiding change is not always the healthiest thing because some changes can be good and change is a part of life. It is knowing that all I have to be able to do to be successful with change is do what? Do it consistently enough to get my dopamine back. And so instead of avoidance, jump. And if you do that, life becomes very easy and you find yourself adapting. It is at that moment that you can evaluate the change. After I've jumped and I've done it, then I find out, well, this change has been effective. This change has not been effective, but I haven't sabotaged the change. And that's one of the reasons change doesn't work and is often not effective. I would hate to tell you the data on school change because we don't have any. And the reason we don't have any data is because schools don't keep data on change. But if you think empirically, because you've worked in enough schools, we know a number of schools that started to change, started to change, started to change. And the reason we're doing this constantly is because we're having debates about the change and we're fighting it so much because schools are such an environment that maintaining the continuity that makes us feel good because there's enough changing with kids and all this stuff every day that we hold on to those things. But if we understood it, we could actually make some changes. And I think we're at a place where we have to consider making some changes in schools for kids because for the first time in history, kids' brains are significantly different than yours and your parents. And that says we're teaching a new brand of kid. And we need to think about that. And we need to make some degree of changes. And if we don't make those changes, we're not only fighting our systems, but we're also going to be fighting the kids' brains. And that's not where we want to be. But some fights for the kids' brains might be good.
So going into chapter 3, believe it or not, on confirmation bias, you cover how our brain is programmed to see things in the environment that support our existing beliefs, and that research shows that teachers' beliefs about students might be the strongest predictor of outcomes. And we talked about this in the very beginning, just reminding me of David Fink, what he wrote in his foreword. So how can we combat confirmation bias and update our own belief systems? How do you suggest we do this?
The problem with belief systems is that, okay, let's first start about the beauty of our belief systems. Um, our belief systems are designed that once we have a belief, our brain is designed to protect. That is important to me because it is that belief that got a sailor to go past a certain level in the ocean and believe he wasn't going to fall off the face of the earth because the earth was flat at that time. It got two brothers to jump off a cliff and think they could fly. It got us to the moon. So that ability to protect what we believe against all odds is a beautiful thing. The problem is we need to understand that once we have that, we tend to spot things in our environment that support our belief and miss the contradictions. That is one thing. We also need to know that we are actually very dishonest about our beliefs. Oftentimes, our beliefs are changing constantly. And there's sometimes we started out with a belief, it changed, and then we say, what? I always believed this would happen. And so we're not very, our level of integrity with this stuff is not well measured, is not sinister. It's just that our memories are terrible and our beliefs are constantly changing and our memories are constantly changing and our belief systems are not as refined as we once thought it was. And so I now have this thing and I actually, instead of fighting it and instead of doing all this stuff, I'm going to lean into it. The power of belief is more important than what the negative things the beliefs does for us. So if the power of belief that got us to the moon is that powerful, then the data on when teachers believe in students, the outcomes are consistently better is something I should lean into. And so when I think about confirmation bias, rather than thinking about running from it, I think about leaning into it, saying, okay, if I believe the best is more likely to happen. And for the other stuff, one of the other things I always tell people is I look for contradictions. I just do. And it's gotten so much in my life that I look for contradictions in in my belief areas. So I know I'm going to protect my beliefs. So I used to go, someone would say something that was against my belief, and I would automatically discount it. And now I'm at the place where I try to hear it and sometimes investigate it to see if it's true. Because what ends up happening is all believers are running towards their belief. And with social media now, we get to boost our beliefs so strongly because we always have a forum for amen. And what's happening is our tolerance to entertain variance is dropping. So now when there's variance, people are getting angry at variance. You disagree with me, you don't believe it's and I think if I understand my brain's protection for my beliefs and my tendencies, it got me to be more comfortable in investigating. And I also found out when I did that, one of the things I really found out is that there is a subconscious fear of investigating something that you don't believe in. It's almost like a fear that what happens if your belief isn't right. And there's science behind that, because when you lose a belief, it often has to be replaced for you to get your homeostasis back.
Right.
And I think so. I think people are afraid of losing their beliefs too. And so getting over the fear of that has helped me start to have a greater tolerance. So now I hear someone who has a very different belief than me, and I go, And then I sometimes go, let me check that out, rather than that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really good. I just have to ask you this one question, because as I was investigating this and looking at, all these subconscious biases, it made me think about when I had a meeting with an episode way back, 84. It was Dr. Shane Creato, who works with Dr. Amen's offices. He was the technician that was looking at my brain. and he saw some things in my brain scan that he said, you know, we got to work on your sleep, and for sure I've been working on that for the past, I don't even know, like 8 or 9 years. But he saw something in the brain scan and he asked me, Andrea, have you ever done shadow work? And I thought, what is that? And so I'm, of course, Googling shadow work, and I came across Carl Jung's work. But I wonder, how does our subconscious biases, how are they similar to maybe our shadow side or things about ourselves that we we hide, but once we can learn about them, we can work on them and be better people. Are they kind of similar?
Okay. We probably should define shadow side for
Yep.
the working audience here. Shadow side is basically a way of saying that deep in our subconscious, we often have some, in many cases, trauma, but I don't want to use that word because it's so overused. Events or experiences that cause us to have spots that are influencing our reactions to life that we're unaware they're happening. So there are things in our heads that are actually getting in there, subtly changing our response to the world. Yeah, so that's an interesting way of saying bias, and so it's
Hey,
the same exact thing.
I thought
Um,
so.
yeah, and I think if you go back to negative bias occurred before you have long-term memory. And so it showed you how something can happen that you don't remember that influences your actions. Well, that's the same thing that he's referring to. There are things that happen that can be so significant, and they constantly are attaching themselves to things in your daily life that are influencing your response to the world. So, well, bias is saying that many kind of biases basically act the same way. They almost are a shadow side of the world. We're reacting to the world based on things that are happening in our brains without us being aware of them. And so being aware or understanding it better makes us people who are more capable, one, of change, but two, of also coming to grips with some of those issues, or the possibility of those issues. And I think that's good, but I've always been one to try not to get too much inside oriented with life, because as a clinician, when I was a therapist, one of the things I strongly believe in is that therapy should be active. And instead of focusing on what the issues are, I know actions can change the issues. So it's the same way that to me, depression, one of the best ways to deal with depression is not dwelling on things that are causing depression, but engaging in actions that make your brain happier. And so, because think about what depression does, it actually robs you of activities, it takes you away from those things, and it makes your brain go more chemically imbalanced, more chemically, and those things counteract those things. So it's getting back to doing things that make you better, make you more chemically feel better, that is one active way of dealing with an issue. And so I like the idea of attacking things. And that's why I said, if you really understand bias, then you're able to start to say, I have an attack plan for how bias could negatively impact in my life, rather than living life going, bias is occurring, it's impacting my life, and I'm completely unaware. And I think that's where most people are.
Exactly. Well, this is really cool to open our eyes to unlocking school bias and then connecting it to our sports and our workplaces. I really like the graphic that our good friend Julie Porter did for you. I'm going to put that in the show notes because it walks through each of the chapters. She did one for me. She's just amazing, tying in each chapter, right? Like,
She's great.
yeah.
And if you understand brain science of learning, One of the ways that we can help people learn is having the information come through different sensory points. And I think the visuals are so easy for the brain to connect to, and it helps you move along in a different way. And so she's basically applying a form of brain science to learning, and it's wonderful.
It's true. I love it. I put that in there. And then just some final thoughts of, just to close out this episode, Horacio, it's been so insightful and helpful. But what can we do with those 200 milliseconds where our subconscious mind has shaped our perceptions and influenced our behaviors? Staying on the positive side of things, how would you close out with dealing with and unlocking school bias?
200 milliseconds is so fast that people don't even understand the concept of what it takes, how long it is, but it's fast. 200 milliseconds occurs so fast, it's completely subconscious. 200 milliseconds is right now predicting our immediate future and impacting our long-term future. If you were to ask most people on the face of the earth, do you want a better control of your future, and would you like to have better future outcomes? I'm thinking the answer will be yes. And one of the reasons we sat down to write a book like this was that the only way you can have any control of those 200 milliseconds is to understand them and then try to modify your life based on good scientific understanding of how they occur. So in many ways, to me, if you truly understand the complexity of bias, you can start applying small to big things in your life that would change your future. And in many ways, then your future might be brighter, and you might then need to put on some sunglasses. It's just a reality. And I think I am big on everybody having. I used to when I was a director of mental health, I actually kept some kids that I actually saw as clients directly because I didn't want to get too detached. And one of the things I used to tell my kids who had been gone through so much in life is that everyone on the face of the earth deserves to be happy. And and we discussed earlier, happiness doesn't have anything to do with the world around you. It's an internal condition. And one of the things that the work on bias really helps you understand is there are elements in bias that can impact that. And if I understand it better, I can engage in the world in a way where it's more fulfilling, my outcomes are better, and ultimately, I am a happier person.
I love it. Horacio, I want to thank you so much for this work that you've done, for coming on the podcast for a fourth time, and really helping us to expand our thinking on this topic tied to brain science. So we know that we can improve ourselves. So we've got to have you back on for a fifth time. So I hope you've got another book coming out soon. Are you
Always working on something.
Awesome, awesome. Well, keep us posted, and that'll be a record.
I like records.
Yeah, absolutely. So people who want to follow your work and reach out to you if they want you to come into the classroom, into schools, is the best place still your website, resiliencyinc.com? Is that your best?
That's one of the ways you reach me. I'm on all social media platforms, and I'm not that hard to find. You
Right.
just get on Google, you can poof, yeah, there it is. But
Exactly.
I actually answer my cell phone, so I'm easy to contact.
Absolutely. I put all the links to your socials there, and I'll add your email because you also respond on email. So I'll put that in.
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Good to see you always.